The next part of the opening is a session that will discuss various aspects of data and access to the NWC RDC. Just so that you know, this is not the actual data center space. This is just our play area. No, this is a completely different space. The data center is just over here in a nondescript doorway into a very nice interior space. We can't actually take you into that space because you're not approved for access. And if I tried to take you all in and have you all sign in, it might cause all sorts of issues for Mike Babb, who would not be very happy signing you all in. So anyway, just so you know, it's just down here. It's on the same floor, about 10, 20 feet that way. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to have a panel session in which Ron and Shawn. Ron is Assistant Director for Research and Methodology at Census, and Shawn is Assistant Chief for Research at the Center for Economics Studies, which is a sort of an oversight organization managing research data centers. Ron will speak first and speak about some of the issues about the data and access, and then Shawn will follow. And I will moderate questions and so on and so forth. So, Ron, jump in.
So I'd just like to open up to say how thrilled I am to be here and see that this has finally happened. I think in my old job as chief of CES, we came out and talked to Mark a few years ago, but just so you know, sort of full disclosure, why I'm more, I've done this a few times at these RDCs, and this one I'm particularly happy about because for those of you who don't know, I was born, short distance down the road in Ballard, and spent my formative years here in the city before moving to the suburbs, and then to a farm over in Ellensburg, which is now on fire. Anyway, so I'm happy to see that an RDC has come to my old stomping grounds, and that this part of the country that was underserved for so long is now going to be have this excellent facility to do work. And then just sort of one more thing, Tom gave some nice remarks and made it sound like the Census Bureau has this great love affair with RDCs, and that's not true, and we need to thank people like Tom for supporting sort of the mission of the RDCs from years ago when it wasn't a uniform feeling inside the Bureau. I think it is much more now than it was, say, 20 years ago when we just got started. It was a little bit of a controversial thing within the Bureau that whether we would give academics access, outside of the, you were welcome to come to Suitland and our crusty old building and work with the data there, but that we would provide the data out remotely was sort of a different kind of idea. So we've come a long ways, and from support from Tom and other folks that we've been able to do that. All right, so just kind of maybe catching up on some of the stuff that Tom was talking about. So what are RDCs all about? It is a network, and it wasn't always a network. It used to be sort of separate little nodes, but the RDC network really now is a network where when you start doing a project here, you're going to be part of a larger community of folks that are doing projects all over the country, and those people now kind of become your colleagues. So it's a way to provide secure access, to confidential data. Like Tom said, these data are protected by Title 13, not just Title 13, because it's not just Census Bureau data that lives inside the RDCs. It's data from other federal statistical agencies, like the National Center for Health Statistics that Tom mentioned. Also, the Agency for Healthcare Quality and Research has some of their data in our RDCs, and we're talking with other agencies about putting their statistical data in the RDCs. But just as importantly, there's a large amount of administrative data in the RDCs from the Internal Revenue Service, from the Social Security Administration, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, and others that the Census Bureau brings in to do our job. So for instance, the business register that the Census Bureau uses as the frame to conduct all of our business censuses and surveys comes largely from administrative data from the Internal Revenue Service. So these administrative data are important data assets inside the Census Bureau and are part of, available for you to do research on if we get approval from those other agencies. So the RDCs are joint partnerships between the local institutions and the Census Bureau. Okay, so we have an agreement with the University of Washington to operate the Northwest Census Research Data Center, and we have similar agreements with the other institutions around the country. Okay, and so that's how we that's sort of the the mechanism by which we do these things. And when I say that joint partnerships, that both the local institution and the Census Bureau are investing in this activity. So we both got skin in the game. I think everybody wants to make sure that they see these things succeed. All right, so why do we do this? Okay, what's the point for us? Well, obviously we get consultation with leading researchers, and some great examples if you want to look at Census Bureau programs that have benefited from this type of collaboration. So I didn't spell out the acronym here, but the local, or the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics program, sometimes known as the Local Employment Dynamics Program, LEHD, is largely a joint project by Census Bureau and academic researchers, John Avowed at Cornell, John Haltwanger at Maryland, where we've linked employer and employee data to create a whole range of new data products, including On the Map for emergency management, which you can go on and you can see what the fires are doing on the other side of the mountains right now. So it's very cool. All my friends and family over there think that that's clever. But also a lot of really innovative disclosure avoidance research going on at Michigan, at Duke, where we're able to produce products like On the Map, for instance, that have a lot more geographic resolution because we've been working with some statisticians to do some modeling to be able to do those sorts of things. And then so this new thing that we have, the NSF Census Research Network, while not necessarily affiliated with RDCs, but this is an example of the sort of collaboration that we're able to do, and now there's much interest in several of these nodes in establishing an RDC at their university if they don't already have one. Some of them already do. Okay, so what do we get from this collaboration? Well, I've already sort of hinted at a couple of these. We get new estimates and data products. So LEHD, not possible without this sort of collaboration with leading academics. But also sort of more mundane things, okay? So better efficiency. We improve not just our products, we improve our processes, okay? So that we can now do more with the same sort of resources that the Congress gives to us. Expanded measurement capabilities. We can do new things. And also some of the work that happens in the RDCs actually goes back and improves the documentation to help both Census Bureau and other future RDC users. A lot of the Census Bureau over the years was in the business of sort of doing surveys, cranking out the estimates and moving on to the next thing, and documentation for posterity's sake was not exactly one of the sort of mission critical activities that they were involved in. Obviously, if you want to use the data for longitudinal research, documentation is kind of an important and critical thing. All right, so what do you all get out of this? So the key here is you get access to underlying microdata, okay? And the microdata has variation in it that just isn't available in sort of the public use tabulations, okay? So if you're looking at something where the variation within groups is much stronger than the variation across groups, a great example of this is sort of the variation in productivity within an industry as opposed to variation in productivity across industries. You need to look at the microdata. Using the aggregate data just isn't going to get you there. But then also these other things, the ability to link the data at the micro level. Okay, and this sounds kind of simple, but this is extremely powerful. So you can take two different surveys if they have the same, they share some of the same survey units, and you link them together. You can now do something that with the data that you couldn't do with either of the surveys before. But also linking the survey data to administrative data. So most of the administrative data sets we have are universe files as opposed to samples. So that adds a lot of analytic power to the data. And then, when you're in an RDC, okay, the computer you log onto, okay, is the same computer that someone logs onto from Cornell or from Michigan or from UCLA, okay? And if they happen to be your co-authors, all right, you're looking at the same data in sort of real time from across the country. So I think that's all I was going to talk about. I'm going to hand it over to Shawn now, who will get maybe a little bit more in the weeds and sort of anticipating some of the questions you might have and talk about the data in more detail and how you might go about getting it. So thanks.
Feel free to interrupt with questions. I think we have a little bit of extra time to give you a little bit of background about me. I started at the Carnegie Mellon Research Data Center in 1997, and I actually arrived there shortly before the executive director showed up with all of the data that he loaded onto the server at the Research Data Center. And so we've come a really long way since those days. Like Ron said, there's no actual data sitting in the Research Data Center anymore. You're accessing data that sits at the headquarters computing facility in Bowie, Maryland, and what you have is sort of a secure connection to that data and lots more processing power than we used to have. But my history with the Research Data Center goes back. Carnegie Mellon was actually the first at an academic institution. The Boston RDC was actually in our regional office. So Ron missed a quote, but I think Tom covered this really well, is that, you know, one of the broader view of benefits to the research data centers is just, you know, that the statistical information that we produce is, you know, key to informing the people and understanding, you know, the business, the economy, the people, and, you know, key to a functioning democracy. So the network. So this is actually a new map. So the blue dots are research data centers that are now open. The red dots are people that are filling up my email inbox with inquiries about, can we have a research data center? This year we opened 2 research data centers, which ties our record for how many we can open in a year. So I have a full employment situation for myself. I'm going to be, you know, busy for at least 6 more years. So, but I think one thing is you are part of a network that's growing. There's a lot of interest by a lot of institutions, and maybe you guys all have co-authors at some of these places. So, so we've been expanding, increasing the number of active users. I have an email this morning saying, do we really have 654 people working in the research data centers right now? And that's about right. There's about 150 active projects and about 650 researchers. Texas A&M and Seattle are the newest locations. You guys have been open since sort of June officially by Census Bureau standards, and Texas opened last Monday. And we've also instituted, you know, branches, which have helped some areas kind of save on costs, right? So Stanford is a branch of the Berkeley Research Data Center, and we have approved branches at USC and UC Irvine down in California, because apparently the traffic in the LA area is a constraint to researchers being able to get to UCLA. So at the same time, we're trying to make more and more data available in the research data centers. So you already have access to basically all of the census microdata that we collect, and the administrative data as well. There's very little that we don't make available to the research data centers, and if it's not available, it's probably because no one has ever asked for it. The types of research that seems to happen mostly in the RDCs is more related to exploiting the geographic and industry detail on the internal files that's not available on public use data sets. And so we do have some data sets that are indicator series, that are, you know, monthly data that don't have as fine geographic and industry details. So I think the kind of work that people are doing exploits a certain kind of data, but I mean, that data is certainly, you know, something that we can get. But, you know, with limited resources, we try to focus on what researchers are really asking for, right? So we're always trying to get the next, the 2010 decennial data available to researchers as fast as we can, or the economic census data that we collect every 5 years as soon as we can, because it takes a long time for the Bureau to process those data sets and make them available, but we want to be able to kind of hit the ground running and make them available as soon as we can. So Ron mentioned, we have data that goes back to the early 60s. It turns out that, I forget what company it was, Unisys or something like that, finally told us that they would no longer take money from us to support keeping their last computer alive at the Census Bureau. So there was a substantial effort to try to rescue all of this data from the 1940s and 50s and early 60s off of our computers. And we're trying to make this data available to researchers as well. It's actually, unlike walking in and having, a nice data set that has documentation because it's used over the years, we have files that we don't even know if they're useful, because we've rescued tens of thousands of files. And what we're trying to do is provide sort of a quicker review and approval process to get provisional access to those data so that the researchers can just come in and find out if they can make sense of it. Example is that we have a researcher from Michigan who, I don't know if people are familiar with the SIP. So there's actually 4 years of data from the predecessor to the SIP. I forget what it's called, the ISDP, I don't know. So I don't know what it stands for, but they're actually coming in and getting access to this data because they want to be able to link it, as part of their broader project to the SIP data, so they can get some poverty estimates back into the kind of mid-1970s. So that's an exciting thing. I mean, there's just so much data. We don't have necessarily the resources to give our data staff to wade through and create research-ready data sets. So it's something we're trying to leverage the talent and the resources in the research data centers to do that. And then we're hosting data from other agencies, and we're always looking to expand that. Mark is just one of 13 executive directors that like to plant seeds in my ear about what data they would like available in the research data centers, and we're always sort of looking for researchers that have contacts and think that there are agencies that would be willing to host their data. EEOC data has come up, data from the Energy Information Agency, things like that. So I think we have a very broad view of what we could make available. I mean, those agencies will have different sets of requirements for using their data and things like that, but it is a way that we're seeking to expand the RDC network. So there, I think we alluded to this a little bit, that there's tension between, researchers want more and more information. They want to be able to do research. They want to they want to be able to do studies that people are going to find interesting and relevant for the economy and the people. But at the same time, we have to protect the confidentiality of the data. So I think one thing that we've seen is there's been a little bit of a pulling back in the kind of the detail that you could get in the public use data, right? And so I think that's kind of increasing the importance of the research data centers in terms of the quality of the data and the information that's available. The public use data isn't necessarily getting more and more detailed, but kind of less so. And I think that's just part of the sensitivity with protecting confidentiality. One of the ways that we do that with the demographic data is there are no social security numbers that we make available. So the Census Bureau is sort of very sensitive about personally identifiable information. So we have a different anonymous identifier that we use, and if people want to bring in external data with social security numbers, we'll take that social security number information and basically eliminate it from the files and give them a file with the anonymous identifier. So we're pretty sensitive about those things. Also like names and dates of birth and things like that. So one of the things we can do is in the research data centers is really pull together data from different sources. A lot of the sort of simplest projects to evaluate whether there's a benefit to the Census Bureau is if you're bringing in some external source of information that can be used to corroborate information that we're collecting on our censuses and surveys are about households. And there's a lot of projects that do that. And you can also pull together data from different parts of the Census Bureau. I think the Research and Methodology Directorate that Ron runs on a day-to-day basis, we have that vision for, can we take demographic and decennial and economic data and combine it? We have a whole program that does that with state data. But I think a lot of the program areas at the Bureau, are much more worried about, sort of the survey process, right? They need to design their forms, collect the data, process the data, publish it, and they usually don't have that much time between they need to think about how to improve their content or change the content and do the next cycle, right? So it's really researchers in the R&M Directorate and in the research data centers that are going to have the time and resources to really do the high quality research to improve programs. So multiple modes of data access. Do you really need a research data center? The answer is obviously yes. But there are some ways that people are familiar with Census Bureau data. There's public use files. My vision of why we have research data centers in the first place was basically to fill a giant hole in the economic data side, right? So we didn't have public use data sets for businesses, so the public use files for the SIP and the CPS and the decennial censuses, those filled a lot of research use, filled the need for data for a lot of the researchers on the household side, the household and demographic side, but there wasn't sort of a public use data set for businesses. And so researchers could start coming to the Census Bureau, and originally it was the Census of Manufacturers and the Annual Survey of Manufacturers was really the only data that was available, and people did a lot with that, looking at entry and exit of businesses, looking at productivity. But we've actually come a little bit further in terms of still producing public use data. So there's now synthetic data for the LBD. So Ron mentioned the Longitudinal Business Database. It's basically every snapshot of the Census Bureau's business register linked together from 1975 through 2010. And there's a synthetic version of it that people can download and do some analysis on. It doesn't have a lot of industry detail or state detail, but it is a way to kind of get an idea of what's available in the LBD. And then you can actually do your analysis on the synthetic LBD and then send your code to the Census Bureau, and we'll sort of run your results on the internal data and then send you the results. Okay, so you can kind of do all the work up front. And so there are some ways to access census data kind of short of writing a proposal and getting into the research data centers. But if you want to combine data sets, if you want to bring in your own information, you're going to have to do that work in the research data centers. So here's some examples of the kind of work that's been done in the research data centers. I think I actually tried to hide that slide. So, I mean, there's just too many things happening in the research data centers to really go over all of them. So I'll just kind of broadly let me talk about some of the other agencies that have been working in the research data centers. And so there you may have kind of co-authors and collaborators in other agencies as well. But the National Science Foundation sponsors a survey, and they have researchers in working at the Census Bureau. NIST, the Economic Research Service, labor statistics. There used to be a big business register comparison project between the ES-202 program at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and our business register. Bureau of Economic Analysis, a lot of the data that the Census Bureau collects goes into national income accounting and GDP estimates. And then there's a lot of researchers from the Board of Governors, and they sponsor a survey at the Census Bureau, and HRQ sponsors a survey. So what's the data that's available in the RDCs? Economic data at the establishment or the firm level for virtually all the censuses and surveys that we do. Demographic data and linked employer-employee data is available. And then we also have data from NCHS and AHRQ, and they have their own websites and their own process for getting access to the data. So all we are is really a facilitator. They will let us know when a project is approved. We'll create accounts for people. They send us the data. We make it available in like a project directory, and you're off. The one thing that you do have to do is, if you're going to walk into the lab, you still need to become a Census Bureau sworn employee, and you have to take some training because you could have incidental access to tax information, which is in our files. So the one thing I will say on the security side is it wasn't a requirement to have pin things on the bathroom. I thought that was just for full disclosure, we're not so secure that we make you enter a password to get into the bathroom normally. That must be some other requirement. So you need a badge to get a census badge to get into the census lab, but we don't usually restrict bathroom access.
We do prefer you not go to the bathroom in the lab.
You can talk to Mark about making it more available, the bathrooms more available to researchers. But so the advantages of the RDCs, I think I talked a lot about this, but the demographic data, you're going to get much more detailed information. The variables aren't top-coded like they would be in the public use files. You're going to get finer geography, and a lot of the business data now, and in the MAF, which is the master address file, I think we're actually putting lat long codes on, like rooftop lat long codes on the households and the businesses. So that allows you to, so even if you can't link directly, you can do a lot of stuff with the additional geographic information. So the business research areas. So Ron and I are more the industrial organization firm scope types, along with productivity and entrepreneurship. But there's a lot of people doing work on innovation. Several projects linking administrative data from the Patent and Trade Office, taking all the patent records and linking them using firm names to all of the businesses. I have a project where I'm trying to match all the trademark data, which is also available from the Patent and Trade Office, but opportunities to merge in external data, administrative data with census products. And then we also collected information about R&D in a survey that we co-sponsor with the National Science Foundation. And they're keen on making that data available to researchers in the RDCs and having people work with it. So corporate finance and management organizational practices, there's actually a new supplement to the annual survey of manufacturers that, I don't know if people are familiar with the work that Nick Bloom does on management organization practices, but we're now collecting that data as part of the annual survey of manufacturers on, I think the old sample was maybe 4,000 firms, and now we have it on 60,000 establishments, and all, that can be merged to all the information in the annual survey of manufacturers. And then we, environmental regulation, people match in external data like the toxic release inventory, but we also do the pollution abatement cost expenditure survey. Foreign trade, the Census Bureau, collects all the administrative data from, I think it's the Customs agency. And so we have 17 million trade transactions data that we've matched to all of the businesses in the business register, both imports and exports. So lots of new research going on looking at the behavior of firms, and they're exporting, and what are their characteristics, and importers, what are their, and Mark mentioned that area of research would be of interest to people here at the UW. So one of the things about that is this linked firm transactions data was actually done originally in a research data center project. Okay, so external researchers kind of did the first incarnation of this linked data set, and now some people on my staff, economists on my staff, kind of maintain that database and produce it annually for researchers and update it. So it is the case that even some of the products that we make available to researchers are generated by other research projects. Like they thought it was interesting, and there's a lot of people, you know, and they do a better job of going out and marketing how cool it is than we do, I think. So we sort of recognized that it was really valuable and people were asking for it. So it's something that we maintain and update now. And then spatial clustering, rural development, health economics. I think especially the last one is going to be kind of big in the future. So I'm not a labor economist, so I don't know this literature nearly as well, but if you're interested in demographic data, you know, this is probably the standard set of things that you guys are interested in doing research on. And you can basically exploit the ability to link people over time and to use the detailed geographic information in the data that we have. So linked data, we spelled productivity wrong. I'll have to fix that. So, you know, link productivity. But there's lots of opportunities to link, you know, data on both workers and the businesses where they work. I mean, there's just a ton of interesting research that's going on right now. And one of the ways to think about this benefiting the Census Bureau is that, so we've been talking more recently, is can we take information on the characteristics of the workers and put that on our frame and use that to stratify and do a better job of sampling. So one of the surveys that we do is the MEPS, the Medical Expenditure Panel Survey, and it asks establishments, you know, tell us about all of the plans, the health plans that you make available to your researchers. And one of the things that the linked employer-employee data could do is if we brought some information about the age distribution of workers, maybe what we could do is we could actually sample businesses that have, you know, younger workers on average, or do they have older workers on average, and, you know, so I think there's, you know, when you're thinking about, you know, benefits to the Census Bureau, it can be very kind of broad-based, right? I mean, when you think about, you know, how we do sort of sample selection, a lot of it is on, you know, information like your payroll or your employment or your revenue. But there's a lot of information, there's a lot of things that we do surveys on where maybe that isn't nearly the best information to use. And so creative ways to improve the frame that the Census Bureau uses to collect information from businesses and households is a great benefit. Bureau. So we've had more and more health-related projects happening in the research data centers. So I think the first year we made health data available, I'm not sure when it was, maybe 5 years ago, there were 5 projects. Now it's 30. And I think the level of interest in the health data, it seems really high. So I've been to some of the red dots already and talking to them, and they seem really keen to be using the National Health Interview Survey and other things that NCHS produces. But you know, and there's no end to the interest in the research topics there. So how do you actually, you know, how does the RDC work? Okay, so this is probably one of, you know, probably already sold on all the great things we have, but now you have to know how you get in. So benefits to the Bureau, I sort of, you know, I mentioned that. That is the skill that most of the potential RDC researchers don't have, right? I mean, so you know how to write the proposal to the National Science Foundation and sort of explain why it's a contribution to the literature and things like that. Mike Babb in the back, you know, he's keeping a low profile, but he is the person who will help you in that regard. He should be sort of your first point of contact. Lots of people, you know, have co-authors and no other researchers in the Census Bureau. I mean, I think we'd encourage you to get in touch with them as well. But getting in touch with people that you know at the Census Bureau isn't necessarily a sufficient condition. You should really talk to us too. We want to just know that proposals are being developed so that we can help as much as we can and not necessarily be surprised. Especially maybe if you want to link in external data or use data that currently isn't available, because then we can kind of make sure that, you know, when your proposal gets reviewed, it's, you know, it's something that we've checked to make sure that that data can be made available. But the process really starts at the local research data center. And then, you know, once sort of Mark and Mike agree that the proposal is really ready to go, it's going to come into the Census Bureau, and it's going to go through a process of review. You know, scientific merit, Ron talked about that a little bit. If you have an NSF or an NIH grant, that's not really going to be an issue in terms of the scientific merit, but the feasibility part is. You know, the problem is that this data is confidential and it's sitting in the research data center, so you don't really know what it is you're going to be getting until you're actually in the door, but how do you write a proposal for something that you haven't seen? So that's still a hard, a hard nut to crack. But that's why, you know, Mike does know the data, and so do the people at the center. And so what we'll do is provide people feedback on feasibility and answer questions, and that's where the program areas would be helpful as well. So we'll really be looking at it. So you have a great question, and you think this data, you think that the Census Bureau data can be used to answer it, and we'll sort of help you determine whether that's, you know, the case or not. And we'll also review it for disclosure risk, partly, you know, just to do our due diligence, but also we don't want to approve a project, and then after 2 years you're like, here are my results, and we're like, oh, you can't take any of that out of the Census Bureau. That would be even worse than. So we just want to make sure that, you know, in your proposal you do a good job of describing the output that you want to take, and where the researchers really, where the RDCs really fit in, is not to do giant tabs of output like at the track level, right? We want you to exploit the geographic variation and run regressions and take out your coefficient estimates, right? And maybe do some summary statistics at like a national level. That's not going to be a big deal. But we're not really set up, you know, when you think about the American Community Survey, you know, they set forms and collect data on 2 million households and publish like 1 billion cells, right? And do primary and secondary disclosure on them. We're not set up to really, you know, have people publish another 1,000, 2,000 cells, you know, in that system, right? So it's really regressions and, you know, but that's shouldn't be too binding of a constraint. That's usually the kind of work that people want to do. And the last one isn't too hard. Usually you just have to justify why you can't do it with publicly available data, but that's usually pretty easy. And then other agencies have their own review process. Does anybody have any questions? No? This is okay.
Can you tell us about the personal identifier on individuals, and how common is that across, say, Census Bureau products or other agencies so that you can match people?
All census, it's the identifier that we use internally within the census, and it's not available anywhere else. In fact, I think there's probably only 5 people at the Census Bureau that know the.
We have a place at the Census Bureau where if you have personally identified data from outside, or where we're, you know, so for instance, we take in administrative data from IRS or SSA. Those data get the name, address, date of birth, social security number, if they have all those things, get translated into what we call a PIC. Okay. So
it's like
those things are removed. So if you have data that we could pick that have one of those, you know, some combination of those fields.
Would it be a common pick across decennial censuses and American
Yes.
Community Service?
Yes.
Across populated
Yep.
people in 90, 2000, 2010?
Yep.
So it's consistent within the Census Bureau, and then if you bring in external data, we have the ability to use other administrative data to verify or put a PIC onto your data. But we'll never give you, basically once it comes in the Census Bureau, there's no social security numbers that are available in the research data centers, even if you provided it. So, and then there's also the ability to put the PIC on even if there aren't social security numbers on, right? So Ron mentioned name and date of birth and street address. You can use that information to put the numeric identifiers on it so that you can basically just merge that data with the ACS or the decennial.
Sometimes that process has more noise than other times, obviously.
Could I ask a follow-up question? Have any of either the Bureau's own work or any of the other RDCs work with what we used to call the INS, it's now part of Homeland Security, where they track immigration records. Has that ever been a collaborating agency through the RDCs?
So, do you mean do you mean like TINs, the taxpayer identification numbers
No.
that get assigned, or you mean the agency?
I don't think we have immigration.
I don't think so.
That's a sensitivity. Obviously, we would like all residents to respond to surveys, so connections perceived or real between us and law enforcement agencies is often.
No, this is like when people get an immigrant visa.
No, I think we get those. Well, we get those from some sources, right? They're not given a social security number, they're given a taxpayer
No, we don't
identification number.
get those.
Well, we get them from.
We get a small subset of those, but we don't get we don't have what IRS has, so.
Okay.
And they don't want to give them to us. We're trying to get them to give them to us.
So there was a question back here.
What's the average review process time?
Okay. Right now, the census review part, once it comes to census, is right now like 4 months. So it's lengthy. I did talk to the executive directors about how we're working to improve the process. I think a reasonable, a good estimate or the goal that my area is shooting for is to be able to turn around a decision within 60 days. So right now we're not there, and not even close. Partly because of key staff, leaving and resources at the Census Bureau. But I think the other thing is we've been working hard. I think we've gotten to the point where these research data centers are sort of a core part of what we do, but we haven't necessarily been thinking about how do you sort of scale this thing up. And it's not just that having a local person is going to make it scale, right? Because there's a much broader set of research questions that are being asked now. So how do you have the right mix of sociologists and geographers and economists? I kind of feel sorry for Mike when he gets a PhD econ student proposal or a trade proposal and he's in the geography department. It's a hard job, but there's a pool of people in the research data center network, and so what we're trying to do now is figure out ways to kind of streamline the process. One of the things I talked to Ron about is we have sort of long-time researchers that come in. Is there a way to maybe accredit some of the researchers that have been coming in for the last 20 years, where there'll be a little bit more of a streamlined process for them, where we're reviewing their projects, but maybe not nearly as closely because of their track record. So it's something that Mark will be able to ask me lots of questions about in a year when we have our meeting with the executive directors, but I'm hoping to see some significant improvement. And then we're also, we've got a new criteria agreement with the Internal Revenue Service on the business side, and we should have reviews from, decisions from them within, it's a little confusing, but it's either 10 or 60 days. So, that's way better than it used to be, trust me. So, so the one thing to say about projects though is they are 3 to 5 year. They are often 3 to 5 year commitments by researchers that they will often start when they're, if they're a graduate student, they may start and take them with them, to some other place that has a research data center, but it's a part of a broader research agenda. It's not just a paper, and it's often the case that, so there's a little upfront cost, but it's usually for like a long, period of access on the other side, and partly just because people are asking for so much data that they don't know, that it often is an investment just to kind of get your data sets kind of linked and get them ready.
But we're also doing things like some of the idea behind some of the synthetic data sets are to allow researchers to get a better idea of what the data look like inside the RDC so they can get a better sense of and craft a better proposal for the beginning. So we have had this problem. It is difficult to write a proposal to use data that you haven't looked at before, but that's, you know, the chicken and the egg problem with confidential data. You think, you know, you need to write a proposal to get access to it, but you don't know how to write that proposal how you do. So we're trying to find ways that allow researchers to craft a better proposal so that, you know, it takes less time internally to review the thing and try to figure out what it is the person's asking, but also to craft the sort of the documents that we need from you better, so that, you know, you're answering the questions that need to be answered and not answering things that don't need to be answered.
Just to follow up on that, so suppose the answer after 60 days or whatever is no. What, is there information about why the answer is no, and
Yeah,
what
so
kind of appeal or process?
You get all the reviews. There isn't an appeal process per se. You can just resubmit your project after you address the comments. I think what we were finding is that everything was a revise and resubmit. You know, we don't necessarily want to tell people no. We just want you to work on it until we're sort of all satisfied that there's going to be benefits.
It's usually not a no anyway, because if you've worked with the local RDC administrator, we should have weeded out the things that just are never going to work before you've ever crafted a proposal in the first place. So, in the sense that, you know, from the total universe of potential RDC projects, and the ones that there's a subset of those that we learn about, and then there's a subset of those that we say, hey, that's a good idea, you should pursue that. Some of them we say, like, that'll never work. You know, it's just, and it's usually a feasibility problem. You know, somebody reads something in some document somewhere that says, oh wow, the Census Bureau collected this question at some point. That sounds really cool. I want to go do research on that, and then you find out, well, no, those data aren't what you think that they are, or some, you know, some administrative source, or that the data just aren't going to support the analysis, and it's a waste of everybody's time to do it. So we try to keep those from getting to the sort of the right stage where there's a review. So hopefully it's, like Sean said, they're often revised and resubmit. Like, what did you really mean? You know, clarify what you want to take out so we can understand the disclosure risk, those sorts of things. That's the kind of back and forth that actually usually happens.
And you get the written reviews, right? And so the way that it works is that on the business side, they're getting reviewed by economists that are in the Center for Economic Studies. If you're asking for decennial data or demographic data, we're usually farming the reviews out to the program areas where the expertise lies, right? Because we don't necessarily know everything about everyone's data. And then we make the decision, but we supply the reviews to you, and almost always encourage you to you know, address the comments and send it back. And then not make it, you know, take 120 days to get another answer back, right? But try to really expedite those. So the security, how does it work? So we're not going to allow, you know, there's no tour. So unfortunately, so we won't even let you in unless you have a Census Bureau badge. So the locations are actually census locations. So basically, there's like a little piece of the Census Bureau that sits on the other side of that wall. You need a Census Bureau badge to get in. There's a Census Bureau employee that sits there. All the security cameras are hooked up to the Census Bureau's internal security network. You know, so it's a little piece of the Census Bureau, and then you know, the personnel security is that everyone becomes an employee of the Census Bureau. You know, and there's annual training on sort of data stewardship, and, you know, what the penalties are for, you know, disclosing information about a business or a person. And so we kind of due diligence on training people on the kind of the gravity of having access to individual or business data. I mean, the last thing that we want is people finding out that people were carrying someone's, you know, private information out of the census research data center. I mean, it's not something that we that we worry about too much, because that really wouldn't be very useful to anyone. You know, one record at a time, or you know, something you can't really print very much in the research data centers, although there's a printer. So it's not a huge concern, but I mean, it is something that we have to, you know, the downside, you know, even though it's a small, you know, probability, the downside is huge. And then there's no data in the RDCs, right? So you basically get a connection to servers where the data sits. You only get access to the data that you're approved for. So there's hundreds of data sets, and when your projects, you know, when you're proposing your project, you'll list, you know, the 10 that you want, and those are the only 10 you get access to. And then we'll review your output before it leaves the Census Bureau, and we have an officer located at CES that does all of that disclosure review. And you also work with your local RDC admin to make sure that that process goes smoothly. And that is one place where the executive directors were all very happy that the output, it's not taking a long time for people to get their output released. So right now it's the constraint's more on the getting in and not on getting things out. And you know, we talked about regression output, summary statistics at a very high level. And then, you know, tabular data is discouraged, and printouts, the printer is actually secured in Mike's room, so if Mike isn't there, then there's no printing. If he is, then you can get access to your printer. The one thing I will say is that the lab is open 24/7, so for graduate students that like to work from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 4 o'clock in the morning, they're more than welcome to go in there. The same is not true for projects by the NCHS. That agency wants the RDC administrator present when people are doing research. So that's a little bit more of an issue.
Although we're trying to convince them that it's okay.
Yeah. So we do have some resources available to researchers. One thing that we've been trying to do is when advisors have projects and get graduate students that are going to write their dissertations, we try to have them apply to the CES mentorship program. And basically what we'll do is we'll pair them with someone that knows their data or their subject matter to give them a little bit of guidance, not so much about their, you know, the actual research question, but a little bit more about the data, you know, and things that they may run into, and maybe some of the other related literature that they do. And then we also fly them out to DC to give an early version, either of their job market talk or maybe even of their proposal, just to, so we can, they usually learn quite a bit about the data, and sometimes it's, they learn what else they can do with the data that they haven't thought of. So it's a pretty good program. I think we have almost 20 PhD students that have gone through it. We're definitely in the teens. And then I know less about the dissertation fellowship, but we've had a few people apply for that program. And then there's the ASA NSF Census Bureau Fellowship, which is actually more we'll bring senior researchers in on IPA to the Census Bureau. I don't know that we've had people actually working at the Research Data Center, or if we try to bring them, we usually try to bring them to the Census Bureau so they can collaborate with kind of the internal staff. And then there's a lot of resources through the Cornell Virtual RDC, and that's a good place. They have zero ops data sets for a lot of the stuff they describe. They have sort of an external environment that's very similar to the internal research environment, so it's a good place to go to learn about the research data centers. So there's some links, and I'm sure we can make this presentation available to everyone, so I didn't see anyone jotting things down furiously. That's my email address. You know, I'm happy to give, you know, answer any emails that people have. There's actually, Candace Kapanos is the lead RDC administrator, and she's the person, she's kind of the point person on new locations and new data sets and things like that, and sort of network-wide improvements and questions. So she's also a good person to contact, and Mike knows Candace well and can work with the folks at Census. So does anybody have any more questions? Yeah.
Another chicken and egg kind of question. Sure. So I'm going to lay out a scenario, and see if I can figure out how this works. Suppose I wanted to look at the relationship between walk score, race, income, and education. So in order to get the walk score, I need the XY location of that household or individual. I need to push that to Google to get the walk score back. So then I'm going to have a table that's a column of walk score and then the individual values from the other variables. So in essence, I need to take the XY location to an external server to return a value, and then I would generate a set of coefficients for those variables. Can you talk to something like that?
That's an interesting question.
I'm glad you asked us now so we can start working on it.
So the answer is I'm not sure how we would deal with that. So let me give you an example of something I tried to do and got told I couldn't do it. Okay, so after Hurricane Katrina, sort of on a lark, one of the CS economists and I, Javier Miranda, said, let's go geocode all of the businesses in the affected area and see how many businesses were actually impacted. So when you see a disaster, you read the newspaper and it says, 87 counties and 40 parishes in Louisiana were declared disaster areas, and there's like 20 million people living there. But really, not that many people were severely impacted. So we had a really cool map that showed where businesses were located in areas that were either flooded or had severe storm damage and stuff like that. So, like the hotels on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, they got wiped out. We had all that. And we showed how much employment and payroll and sort of business was lost there. It's very cool. So they wouldn't let us release the map that showed the location of the business, or the XY, if you will, of businesses. Okay, and so business data is usually less sensitive than household data. Now, the fact is that there is a house there is common knowledge. The fact is that Census knows that there's a house there. That's a more sensitive topic. So we've been working on folks to say that common knowledge that a business is on that street corner, or there's a house, or I can go on Google Maps and see the street view of something. It's we're sort of at this. These rules are seeming kind of overly binding and ridiculous, but they are what they are, and we have to see if we can work on that. So right now, I'm guessing that we would have to find some way of convincing folks at the Bureau that that list of XY coordinates was somehow not Title 13 to let it go out the door.
And the question is, could you just bring in, does Google already have the mapping of XY values to walk scores that we can just bring in?
If I brought in XYs and well, the thing is, I need to know the household location to begin with. So if I have the household location with no identifiers, I have just a bunch of XY points, and I could push those to walk score, bring those back. Can I link those? Could I bring that table of XYs that were from houses with walk score, do my stuff, and then?
No, I think that sounds really cool, and it sounds like we should just do it anyway. But
nobody steal my idea now.
No, but that would be a generic thing that we would, that there would be some way of computing that in census data. So we should follow up after this and talk to folks that are in charge of the master address file and stuff like. I mean, there are people that are interested in these sorts of things at the Census Bureau. But how we get around the, so for instance, we can't even acknowledge to you that certain households or businesses are in the data. That's considered to be a disclosure, okay? But yet we say that we do censuses, okay? So, I mean, it's kind of, we would be admitting that we're completely incompetent if we didn't say that, we didn't know where, retail establishments that belong to a large retailer headquartered in Bentonville, Arkansas, are right now. We do. So, but we're not supposed to say it now.
Yeah, just a question, I don't know who knows the answer, but the connection with human subjects protection, is it kind of, so if somebody, say, makes a proposal to, if one of us makes a proposal to NIH saying we're going to do particular research in the RDC, do the protections in the RDC kind of ipso facto mean that it's fine from human subjects' point of view and would be exempt or something? Maybe Mark might know.
I've done it several times now, and I managed to convince UW Human Subjects that it's okay, that if I go through the procedures that the Census Bureau has, the disclosure protections, that it's okay for them. They had a little conniption fit when I first was going to use the 90 and 2000 full 1 in 6 forms, and they asked me how many records I had access to. And you write down 60, 70 million, and it's not what they used to. But after that initial hiccup, it was okay. And they were convinced that as long as the Census Bureau security procedures were fine. That's been my experience at UW.
So you got an exception? Or minimal risk, or what was that?
I think it's minimal risk, yes. Yeah.
So our review, in a sense, takes care of any concern of that from the Census Bureau and our legislations. You know, so Census Bureau isn't subject to the same law that human subjects come to. I mean, so you know, we're subject to Title 13. That's the disclosure protection. But I think that legal folks that have looked at those two things see that, you know, they have the same underlying objective, and that, you know, while it's not called human subject review, it accomplishes more or less the same thing, that individuals are protected.
And our policy office is another place that does the review, and they're particularly concerned about linking individuals across mandatory surveys at the Census Bureau that'll have a higher level of sensitivity. So if you're linking the 1990 and 2000 folks in the decennial at the individual level, that's a lot more sensitive than just maybe pooling the results from like 90 and 2000, 2010 together and looking at geography or something like that, right? So it does get reviewed by our policy folks, but I haven't seen where that's a huge, even for things that are sensitive, where the answer would be no, that you can't do it. So, but it does get reviewed for that. Yeah, in the back.
I'm wondering about data sets that have to do with, for example, locations of transit stations, so infrastructure. And I'm in the urban planning area, so there's a lot of interest in coordinating transportation and housing planning.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm also interested in the HUD data sets.
Yeah. I think HUD is one of the agencies that's been like more amenable to making administrative data available in the research data centers. So we get administrative data from HUD, but I think that we try to bring in as much kind of public use data as we can, right? So, you know, we have multiple projects that are using the patent data. We make that available. We try to make it available in a way where, like, let's make it available to all of the potential research projects instead of necessarily just doing it sort of a one-off thing every time, especially when there seems to be more demand for something than just a single project.
So is your question about whether we have such data, or whether if you had such data, you could bring it in?
Whether you guys have it, or if it's in the works to get it.
So I'm not sure.
Yeah, so my guess would probably be no, that we don't have it, and we could work on it if, you know, Mark really wants us to. I mean, that's actually the thing, right, is how do we prioritize what the set of, you know, current and potential researchers would want, because, I mean, there's tons of data out there. So, I mean, the more people that are asking for something and the more demand we think there is, the more likely it is we'd devote resources to getting it.
The other thing I'm wondering about, is
Yeah.
it possible to use the data sets that you folks have to look at the demographic characteristics of the people who are moving into and out of particular cities, particular neighborhoods? I guess when you get down to the particular neighborhood,
Yes.
maybe that's
Yeah.
actionable or not?
But if there were, but if the analysis was, you know, having the characteristics of the individuals and the characteristics of the places where they were moving from and moving to, you can pool a lot of those, you know, those areas together to do, right? I mean, so that's the way to do that type of analysis, right?
I forget which one we have the prize at 80. So one of the censuses, they didn't keep the stuff that would allow us to do the picking. I think it's 80.
The 1980. They didn't key it.
Yeah.
They kept it. It's on the forms, but it's not
right, yeah,
keyed.
So the picked census data, now it's only every 10 years, but you know that allows you sort of a nearly universe file of down to the neighborhood level of being able to see, you know, you can see where somebody was in 1990, where they were in 2000, where they were in 2010. So that's pretty rich. The LED data, the linked employer, non-employer, or linked employer employee data, it's only that the universe there is workers, because the unit of analysis in that data set is a job as opposed to a household or a firm. But for workers, you can see where they go. Since it's the migration patterns of workers is often more interesting than migration patterns of non-workers. But so, you know, so there's different data sets that allow you to get at those things. But there are some unfortunate holes. For instance, 1980 is a problem. And so, you know, when what is so 2052 when those data become publicly available. So, you know, when Ancestry.com and the Mormon Church are interested in having people go to the written entries and put all that in, well then we'll have that data.
Is between 2000 and 2010, is one of the ACS, are the ACSs also picked?
ACSs.
So you can put those in the middle?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Suzanne?
Yeah, I'm just interested in intergenerational question. So you explained that other than for 1980, we should be able to follow the same individuals for each of the decennial censuses by using the pick. Is there any element to that would allow us to pretty easily nest what households they were in the previous time period? I mean, is there a rationality to the number?
So, you know, I'm not real familiar with how good the picks are for every member of the household. You know, whether they're good for children or not, for instance. You know, but I think that's an empirical question, and I don't know if we've done enough research to really sort of, you know, ferret out all of those issues. But I'm assuming that, you know, sort of post, you know, when you had to have a Social Security, we don't collect Social Security number on the decennial, but the name and address
and date of birth.
Because there is a Social Security number for those kids someplace else, we can link it to that data set that have it. So that shouldn't be too bad. You know, as long as the names are on there and, you know, are in good shape. Now, not all of our citizens fill out those forms very diligently. So.
Yes.
Is the research conducted in RDCs, is it a requirement that be made public? For example, I mean, just on a real practical level, Census.gov has a data tab, and when you go to it, it's got summaries of all kinds of research data.
So one of the requirements of the projects would be, you know, for us to capture the benefits of the project. And the way that we do that is through the CES working paper series, right? So I mean, we fully expect people to write a paper and probably put it in their own working paper series. So it's not much of a requirement, right? Because we think people would be doing it anyway. But there's also sort of technical notes that people could write if there were things that they didn't want to go through the whole disclosure process, but they thought it was a benefit to the Census Bureau. They could make it available internally only for the people in the, you know, so if you were writing using the ACS and the decennial and you wanted to write something sort of for internal use only, you could do that and it could be shared with the folks from like ACS and decennial. There's also a document called the post-project certification that just kind of goes through the list of, you know, you wrote something that says these were your proposed benefits of your project, and then just another document that's kind of the other bookend for, you know, how, what is it that you did that sort of, fulfilled, and it's like the working papers and a technical note and sort of the findings, but it's also, presentations and, presenting the results and working papers and publications.
This is intended to be a transparent process.
Yeah, I think there's actually a requirement that like special tabs that the Census Bureau does are supposed to be made available within 6 months of creation or something. But I mean, we make all the, like, things only come out electronically, right? So there is a record and a log of everything that gets emailed out of the Census Bureau to the researchers and the RDCs. So there is a log of everything that's available. I don't know that we've ever had the case where someone has asked us for someone else's output results. I can't think of an example where that happened. One of the things that, so Lucia couldn't be here today, and she was very sorry about that. She really would have liked to have been here. She's been talking a little bit about the idea of using sort of training for graduate students. Could we use the RDCs and actually bring graduate students in to replicate results from, high-profile research projects where they could go in and actually, so not really do anything original, but just go back and verify, the work that the original researchers did. And that's something that, we're getting asked, maybe not a popular idea with everyone, but it is something.
We can't replicate our own.
It is something that like journals are asking for, right? And they usually have to ask for some special dispensation because we generally can't allow people to come back in and replicate a research result. So, but anyway, is that?
And we should take a break so we can. I think.